Hey my friends, it is so good to see you today. Welcome into my studio and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to walk you through the process of how I create this Wisteria watercolor painting in my sketchbook. So before I get into painting, I'm going to sketch it out. And I was referencing here a painting I've done in the past, as well as a photo of Wisteria that I had on my phone. So I kind of use the two to sort of merge this Wisteria here that you're seeing. If you don't feel comfortable to follow along with what I'm doing here, I have in the description below a sketch for you to download, and you can download that, you can trace it, or you can try your best to just follow along. So I'm really trying here to make sure that my lines are all very smooth, very natural, and I want it to feel like very graceful, no rigid straight lines anywhere. So I have a Wisteria hanging down off of a larger branch, and then I'm also going to think about including these kind of wispy small leaves. So typically what you see with Wisterias in the spring is that there isn't really any leaves typically growing on them when they're in bloom. So this is sort of more of an imaginary Wisteria, because I feel like a flower without any leaves just doesn't feel quite complete to me. So I went ahead and just included leaves in this composition. And a funny thing to note about this video is it was like a very blustery, windy, cloudy day, and so you'll notice that the light on my paper goes from kind of like a cool blue light to more of like this yellow warm light. And as I was looking through the video, I was like, what is going on? Why is it doing that? And then it hit me that that's why. That's why you're seeing that. So something else I wanted to let you know about before we get into painting is that I have a new resource for you. It is 5 ways to bring more life and movement to your watercolor paintings, your floral paintings, or your just artwork in general. You'll find the link below in the description. I would love to share this resource with you. These tips have been so life-changing for me, and I'm sure there will be for you as well. So getting into painting here, I have red and blue that I mixed together to create this purple color. And I'm using a size 8 round brush. And so for the first part of this painting, my process whenever I paint basically anything is I start with an underwash. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically just trying to create the lightest color that these flowers are going to need, the lightest color I'm going to use. I go ahead and start by painting the entire floral part of this Wisteria, all the petals, about the same value. But I really do want you to notice that it's not all exactly the same color. Notice how some of these petals are a little bit more on the pink side, some of them are a little bit more on the purple side. So some of those petals have a little bit more blue in them. Okay, now I'm going to move over to leaves. You'll notice that I just have kind of some paint already on my palette. I'm not really giving too much thought to which colors I'm exactly using for my leaves, but I am being very intentional to make sure that these leaves, especially since we're doing that lightest underpainting, that underwash, I'm mainly trying to use a very light and warm green. So it's a little bit more on the yellow side, just a little bit. But you'll notice that I'm kind of pushing it back and forth. Like some parts are a little bit more yellow and some are a little bit more of like a true green. Later on, I'm going to bring even more of a blue green to these leaves. But for right now, since it's just the lightest colors, mostly it's just a kind of a similar light yellowish green. So the colors that I'm mainly using for this one is I'm using Winsor Lemon. There's a little bit of sap green on my palette, as well as a little bit of Perylene green, but truly you could use whatever ones you have. So now I'm working on my stem. So for my stem, there's so many ways you could get to that kind of brownish orange color. You can mix a little bit of red with a little bit of green. You could just grab whatever brown earth colors you have, mix them maybe with a little bit of blue to make them even darker. But I believe I used a a raw umber for this one. So now I'm going in with that same green color, and I'm using the tip of my brush to articulate the little tiny stems and the tendrils, those beautiful curling, twisting wisteria tendrils in this green color. And if you want to switch to a smaller brush here, probably a size 0 or 1, you might find it a little bit easier. This is a little bit of a larger brush, a size 8. My point is very, very crisp and sharp, so I'm able to do those details. But if that feels a little bit challenging, just switch to a smaller brush. So I'm going to go back to my purple mixture here, and I'm going to start adding in a little bit more depth, a little bit more details, not the darkest details. This is sort of like middle, medium value. So I'm using a little bit more paint than I did for the first layer that we did. That was like the lightest layer. But now I'm just going to start adding just a little bit more paint to help start creating form. Something that's really important to think about here is that you don't want to cover up too much of the light purple, because once you cover that color, it's going to be really hard to get that lightness back. And so we don't want to cover up too much. So I'm using, it's kind of like the consistency of maybe like tea or coffee. And also something that I want to point out here is that at the top of my wisteria plant, notice how just very subtly it's a little bit more cool. So it's a little bit more on the pink side. Sorry, not cool. It's a little bit more warm. So it's a little bit more pink. And then as I work my way downward, you'll notice it's becoming a little bit more purple or a little bit more blue. And the reason I did that is I wanted it to feel like the top of the wisteria was getting a little bit more sunlight, so it just feels a little bit warmer. And as it's maybe being cast into shadow a tiny bit more, it feels a little bit more blue, purple, cool in temperature. And I am just using one brush in this painting. Typically what I will do is I will use 2 paintbrushes, one to drop color and then one to smooth things out a little bit. That's a dry or just damp clean brush. So one brush to drop paint and then a damp clean brush to smooth things out. I kind of got into a workflow with this painting where I was just able to do one brush for all of it, where I would just paint, clean it off, and then use that damp tip to sort of smooth things out as I needed to. And you'll notice I'm also starting to add a little bit more depth as it's drying to some of those detailed little, basically like the nodule at the very top of those petals. I am making sure that that part is looking a little bit darker and just adding in those details as the painting is drying. So after I do those details on my wisteria, I used a little bit of a bonus color here called lavender. Lavender is more of an opaque watercolor, so it works kind of like a gouache. And I just love this color. It's so beautiful. And so I added a little bit of lavender to a few places, and then I added a little bit of yellow, just tiny, tiny bit to the center of a few of these petals that are still in places where it's still light. Then I went ahead and added a little bit more depth to my stem and just a few places that it was needed. Okay, so next I am going to add more of a blue-green to my leaves. So I used a little bit of Viridian green, which is a very blue-green color. I mixed it with a little bit of my yellow, and I'm going to go in and just start adding this blue to kind of create more of a shadowed look in a few places to these leaves. I don't want everything to feel too one-dimensional, and adding this more cool, slightly darker blue is a really great way to get that interest, that movement, that dimension, just interest. I think it just needs a little bit more interest. So I am trying to think about making the parts of the leaves that are darker more of the place that the sun is not touching. Okay, I'm going to go back to my deep, dark, brownish mixture, adding a little bit of blue because I really want it to be almost black brown. So I'm adding a little bit of dark blue to my brown mixture, adding a tiny bit of red, yellow, just trying to get to this sort of rich color here. So I added a little bit of dark brown underneath the base of the stem, and then I'm going to go back in and add a little bit of like a orangish yellow to the middle of the stem. Just kind of wanted to add in a little bit more warmth in a few places. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my leaves, add a little bit more depth in a few places as well to these top tiny leaves. I want to start adding in some little veins and just a few places on my leaves. Just give them a little bit more interest, a little bit more life, a little bit more detail. So this is the part of the painting where I get to come back and really have some fun, add in those amazing little details that help to make this painting come to life. I'm going to go back in with that really dark green, added a little bit more perylene green, and I added even more depth to a few places on my leaves, a few more places in these wispy little tendrils. I just really like to make those super dark moments really pop at the very end. I always like to really try and wait to save the really dark dramatic moments for towards the end of my painting process. So you always want to start much lighter, then you bring in those medium middle values, medium darkness, and then you save the really dark parts till the end. And then for the final part of this painting, I decided I wanted to add even more highlights to it. I feel like it just needed a little bit more light in a few places. So I decided to just go ahead and use some fresh gouache right from the tube. That's how you're going to get the most thick, really strong covering of white gouache. So I just dipped right into the tube of paint and just added a few spots where I wanted there to be just a little bit more of a highlight. I don't do that very often, but I actually love how it turned out. Never be afraid to use a little bit of gouache on your paintings. It's totally fine. It is not off limits. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to download my 5 tips for creating more movement down below in the description. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.